copy of the presentation with Craig's contact information as well as other attachments that Craig's going to go over before he begins. And if you have questions during the presentation, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, or if you put your hand up, we can unmute you, and I'll feed the questions to Craig. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Craig.
Thanks, Melissa. Welcome, everybody. Not only am I the training manager for Norton, you notice on the slide here, I'm also listed for tech support. So after the webinar, if you have any questions about the products, there is an 866 number on the back of all these products that goes directly to my cell phone, which is also listed on the first page. And of course, there's my email address if you have any questions. So welcome. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the presentation. So let's see. Let's pull up the very first page. Go ahead into the presentation. As Melissa mentioned, this is the best practices for seam sealers. We've been part of the ICAR Industry Training Alliance since 2008. We are also ASE certified training providers, but we mostly focus on automotive aftermarket, so we don't offer any ASE courses. Matter of fact, at the end of the webinar, I'll show you how to get credit for the class and also show you the application listing the 13 or the 12 other classes besides this one, a total of 13 that are available. One of the main reasons we put a seam sealer class together is we have 6 or 7 seam sealers now, and if you've noticed to the industry or paid attention, a lot more seams are being covered, a lot more seam sealing is being done. Matter of fact, if you're curious on how your collision business is going, you should be covering more seams than actually putting or gluing structural parts together. We did a seminar some time ago about structural repairs and cosmetic repairs. So today we're going to talk about what's available to you and the market in terms of seam sealers and how to use those products particularly best. We're going to start relatively simple. Matter of fact, the first seam sealer is a brushable seam sealer. It comes in a quart. It's rapid curing. As you can see here, it's very flexible. It can go on a number of different painted surfaces. It can even go over bare metal and prime surfaces. It's obviously resistant to weather exposure and temperature variations. It's paintable, it's sandable. It remains very flexible. It seals both wet and dry areas. It's most commonly used on floor pans, firewalls, trunk seams, wheel wells. It can be applied, it says here it can be applied with an acid brush, but it actually can be applied with any type of brush. I've seen people use a regular painter's brush to cover a large area in trunks. It skims over relatively quickly, and you might want to pay attention to the cure times, because those kind of questions are on the test at the end if you want to receive a 1-hour credit for ICAR towards this class. So it air dries in an hour. The application, obviously, as you're probably going to hear time and time again with most of these seam sealers, it needs to be a clean, dry area, obviously free of wax and silicone, because those aren't nice things in the body shop or the collision industry. As I mentioned, it can be applied with an acid brush, but it comes in a quart, so people can use a bigger brush if they want to cover a large area. It also can be cleaned with a panel adhesive cleaner, and so that's why there's a picture here of the adhesive cleaner. It comes in quarts. You'll see the VOCs listed there. There are no VOCs in that particular product, and it has a 1-year shelf life. The reason I mention that is a lot of people like to rework seam sealers with different chemicals. This is best for cleaning and for tooling the product. So as we mentioned, this brushable seam sealer skims over in 5 minutes. You can paint it in 30 minutes, but it's not fully cured for an hour. So it doesn't contain any asbestos, and as I mentioned, it's excellent for adhesion to primer and bare metal. It's very flexible, and it'll hold those brush marks, which most people want a brushable seam sealer for. So a little more information on the seam sealer itself is on the next slide, which for some reason is not advancing. Excuse me a second. I don't know why. There we go. So here's a little more information about the brushable seam sealer. It is a brush grade sealant. We mentioned all the seam areas that it can be used on. It can be paintable in 30 minutes, but as I mentioned before, it's fully cured in an hour. This particular product does have some VOCs in it, not like the panel and adhesive cleaner, as you can see here, 2.81 pounds per gallon, or for our friends in metric system, 337 grams per liter. It is gray in color, which is pretty common in most areas where a brushable seam sealer is needed. And for all our distribution friends and, of course, our body shop customers, how long is this product good for? It has a shelf life of a year. And as I mentioned, it's gray in color. So now we're going to advance to a little more a seam sealer that's used quite a bit more often than a brushable. This is a one-part quick seam sealer. It's beige in color. If anybody's replaced any door skins or any areas around a quarter panel that have a seam cover, typically they'll see a beige type colored seam sealer when they removed any of the base coat or the tint that's on it. This particular seam sealer is rapid curing. It's also flexible. It can be used on all types of painted surfaces and bare metal and prime surfaces like the brushable. But it's really set up for one-part caulking tubes. Most body shops have this type of gun available. We also carry it too. It can be used to seal any body seam against moisture and dust, and obviously to finish skin panels. It's especially useful on applications that require extreme flexibility. So I'd say probably the most prominent use for this particular product is around a door skin seam. Most of the training sessions that we've done when we remove seam sealer, I bet 9 times out of 10 it's beige in color. This is a very economical product. As you can see here, the VOCs are 2.12 pounds per gallon or 250 grams per liter. As I mentioned, it's beige in color, and just like the brushable, it has a 1-year shelf life. In terms of the application, the nozzle is built in to this particular. I'll show you a picture of the actual tube in a minute. The nozzle is built into this particular seam sealer, so you can cut it to the desired bead that you want. Most people mask off the area before they put this particular seam sealer down. I'll also show you some videos in a little bit on some other seam sealers, so in case you can't visualize what I'm talking about. As I mentioned, cleaning is a great best practice for seam sealers. So the area should be cleaned of grease, any oil, foreign matter, especially if we're doing a door skin or any other area. And there's that panel cleaner again. You apply the actual material. It can be tooled before it dries with a putty stick with the actual cleaner itself. You can also remove any excess material in case you got it in areas where you didn't want it to go. This particular seam sealer is paintable also in 30 minutes. It might be a question on the test, so just in case you're wondering. The features are it's very easily applied. It's a one-part system. It's pretty simple. It goes in a caulking gun that most of the body shops have. This one skims over a little quicker than the brushable because it's usually in a very small area. It skims over, fully skins in 3 minutes. It has excellent tooling and adhesion characteristics. It's paintable in 30 minutes, and it remains flexible when it's dry, which is why a lot of people like to use it on a door skin. Here's a picture of the actual tube. As I mentioned, the nozzle's built in. There's usually a date code right on the top or the bottom of the tube, so you know when your shelf life is intact or not. As I mentioned, it can be used to seal any type of a body seam against moisture and dust. As I mentioned here, it says it skims over in 2 minutes. I'd say 2 to 3 minutes depending on time. Everything's considered at room temperature, but it's fully paintable in 30. So as I mentioned, it has excellent tooling and sanding properties. It remains flexible, withstands various temperature changes and vibration. That's why it's great for a door skin application. It has excellent adhesion to clean, bare metal, primed, and painted surfaces. And as I mentioned, this is beige in color. The VOCs are 2.12 pounds per gallon or 250 grams per liter. And once again, it's beige in color. So most people, when they're picking a seam sealer, want to know where's it going and what color is it. So the two that we've covered so far, brushable, typically in a trunk application, is gray in color, very easily paintable. The quick set seam sealer, predominantly used on door skins in areas that are visible to hold out moisture, and they want a relatively quick dry time. The quick set base seam sealer is paintable in 30 minutes. Sausage packs or urethane seam sealer. This is a little different product. It's white in color. This is a very low VOC product. This is what I would call an economical seam sealer. Most people use this seam sealer when they're doing large particular jobs for, say, a truck bed side or a van bed side, minivan bed side. I've even seen some people use it on an intrusion beam on a door skin, which really they should be using a flexible foam. But, you know, guys cut corners all the time. I understand that. But this is really a seam sealer. It comes in a foil pack. It's probably the most common that's out there. It's a one-part polyurethane product. One of the main reasons that I suggest against using it as a foam on a particular intrusion beam on a door skin is what happens to urethane when it reacts to moisture is it actually expands and becomes a foam. So you want to use a flexible foam and something that's desired to control the expansion rate. So when people use this seam sealer on an intrusion beam on a door skin, you really can't control what's going to happen. So people have called me on the tech line saying, hey, I've used the foil pack seam sealer on an intrusion beam, and now the door skin kind of buckled or gave in, and unfortunately that's, you know, why you're not supposed to use it there. So it's paintable in an hour. I believe that might be on the test. It duplicates the OEM finish. As I mentioned, it's very low VOC, 0.49 pounds per gallon or 58 grams per liter. It is white in color, so it's very easily paintable. I'll show you the actual applicator gun in the next slide. But so once again, you want to make sure it's a nice clean surface. So there's that cleaner again. It has a retainer ring that you'll see in the next slide, the actual applicator gun. Most shops have these, just like a caulking gun in their body shops. You want to release the trigger, pull the canister open so you can drop the foil pack in. And then most people use a razor blade to cut the end of the actual sausage pack out, and then replace a nozzle and the ring over it. You'll see a picture of the nozzle and the ring in the next slide, and you can actually gun out the material as needed. The neat thing about the sausage pack is you can gun out a little bit excess material, let it dry, replace the tip for next time, because the tube is 10 ounces, so you get quite a bit of material. Or some people have done the trick of, you know, sticking a nail or a screw down into the nozzle like you would with any regular caulking tube, except for this is a foil pack that's in a special gun, and it can be stored and saved for next time. The advantages or the features of this particular product is it allows you for 100% usage. There's no waste. The urethane should not shrink, crack, or sag. It remains flexible. It's paintable in an hour, and it'll fit most applicator guns that you'll see on the next slide. One thing that I do want to point out here is a tech tip. When feathering this particular urethane seam sealer, it's best to use warm water when tooling it. Urethane seam sealers are moisture cure, so if you add some moisture, it gives you the ability to tool the product, make it flow a little better depending on what you're trying to do. If you use solvents, it'll tend to make the product dry kind of funny. And I've seen some people that use solvent in little areas, and all of a sudden it's not as smooth, it doesn't look as uniform as the rest of the seam, so you can almost tell when they've used a solvent. So this particular product, because it is a urethane, is best to be tooled with warm water. As it says here, the solvents can absorb into the sealant and produce unsatisfactory results, especially when painted. That's usually when I get calls on the tech line saying, I have a section of the seam sealer that looks funny, and then I come to find out that somebody used some solvent to retool it. Here's the actual sausage pack with the tip. They come 6 to a case. There are tips for every one of the sausage pack or foil pack tubes. As I mentioned, it's a one-part. It's paintable for an hour or within an hour. And there's that applicator gun, which most shops have. Once again, the VOCs are 0.49 pounds per gallon or 59 grams per liter. It is white in color and it has a 1-year shelf life, as most one-part seam sealers do. We're going to kind of change gears here and go into a what they call a two-part, even though it's a 1-to-1 mixing ratio. So the three previous seam sealers that we discussed are one part, very common, very economical. Most body shops have them. The market seems to be going more towards a two-part seam sealer for a couple of reasons. Usually people like the fact that they can store a two-part seam sealer pretty easy. They're readily available. You can find them relatively quickly, and they can also be applied with a couple different types of guns. You'll see the manual regular applicator gun here that'll fit a 1-to-1 and a 2-to-1 ratio tube. And of course, a lot of the high production, large fleet, particular collision centers love to use a pneumatic gun. So this particular product can be used with a pneumatic gun or with a manual gun. It is a 220 milliliter tube. As you can see here, it comes 6 to the case like some of the other seam sealers. It's what is mostly known as a high build, non-sag seam sealer. This particular product can be gunned upside down. It works on both vertical and horizontal seams, and I'll actually show you a video of this particular product that's available in our demos and best practices video series in just a minute. So this is probably the most common seam sealer that's used, and people put it in the category of non-sag high build, and you'll be able to see how much of this material can be built up in just a minute when I show you the video. Another very common seam sealer is a self-leveling seam sealer. By the way, this one and the previous one that I just showed you both dry in 30 minutes, which is another reason why people like two-part seam sealers. They can be cured relatively quickly, and they can also be accelerated with heat. When all of these cure times that we've mentioned are at room temperature, the wonderful 70 degrees Fahrenheit that everybody, including us and the paint companies, talk about, and of course 21C for our friends in Canada. So obviously if it's warmer than that, these are going to dry a little faster. If it's colder than that, these are going to dry a little slower. But both this one and the non-sag high build seam sealer both cure in 30 minutes. I believe that's another question on the test for the folks that want to get their ICAR credits. This is also a two-part. It is used for drip rails, probably the most common. Trunk seams, roof channels is another very common. It will not shrink. It remains relatively flexible. I'll actually have a video on this for you in a minute. You want to use this pretty much on horizontal seams, because if you used it on a vertical seam and didn't dam it or hold it off, mask it off somehow, it will run quite a bit. So with that being said, why don't I, before we get into the bare metal seam sealer, why don't I show you a video on both those seam sealers so you can get an idea what I'm talking about. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So let's pull up. The first video will be the high build seam sealer, and then you'll see the self-leveling. And if anybody hasn't met me before, I'm featured in this video, so you might recognize me. If not, hopefully we'll get to meet each other sometime in the future. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a scene with tape on this cardboard. You go on a metal panel, whatever you have easier to show. There's our scene. Make sure the product's coming out okay. Create a bead. Depending on what kind of texture, the factory seal you're trying to cover, notice that you can build it up. The tape will show how long we hold an edge. The advantage of the epoxy is it's paintable in 30 minutes. Notice how I can make it higher here in the middle. This is the end of my so-called seam. If I pull my tape back, you'll see the nice edge that I get. How the product built up. And I can duplicate that factory seam. Notice the height of the material that I can build up. Now I'm going to peel the other side of the tape back so you can see the edge. Notice in the package, the instructions come, all your information in terms of work time, standing time, paint time, 30 minutes, that's key. Fully cured in 2 hours, so we're going to open up a new tip. Make sure we got both sides off. Put it in our gun, make sure it's coming out equally. It is. Before we put our 24 element tip on because it's epoxy. Make sure it's coming out okay. What I've done is I've set up the channels here so you can see the self-leveling feature of it. What you want to do is you want to start down in the furthest spot where you're going to lay the product out and draw it towards you. You want to keep the tip submerged in the product. Notice it's got a nice black color. What I'm doing is I'm filling it up to the top of the channel and letting it self-level itself out. Now what I'll do is just to show you how the self-level itself notices. When I lay the bead and I lay back over it, it's already gone. Here's one I did 30 minutes ago. See, it's fully cured, ready to paint. After 30 minutes, you do the same with competitive products. Notice pinholing. Product actually flowed outside the channel. And then here's ours. Very little pinholing. We have the technology. So now I'll go back to the presentation. Couple things that I want to point out there is it is paintable in 30 minutes, but you might have heard me mention in the video that it's fully cured in 2 hours. That's because this is an epoxy. If you're unfamiliar with epoxies, epoxies cure from the outside in, so that gives you the ability to paint this product before it's fully cured. It skims over relatively quickly. As we mentioned, the urethane sausage pack or foil pack seam sealer, that's in an hour, because urethanes dry from the inside out, so that's why it takes longer for you, but it'll paint that. But that's usually used on much bigger jobs. As we mentioned, the self-leveling seam sealer is good on channels, roof ditches, typically that area that goes from the A pillar across the B pillar to the C pillar on a roof. And the advantage of epoxy is it has great corrosion protection. And as I mentioned, it can be used on a regular manual gun or a pneumatic gun. Some latest buzz in the industry is bare metal seam sealers. Matter of fact, the previous two-part seam sealers that I showed you, those are recommended to go over a prime surface for corrosion protection, but some people don't want to take the time to prime it, so bare metal seam sealers have gained a lot of popularity in the marketplace. The only disadvantage of this particular product is it takes a little longer for it to dry. So this particular product can go over bare metal, but of course you want to cover all the bare metal so it doesn't come back to haunt you in terms of corrosion protection. But this particular product takes 45 minutes to dry because the corrosion protection is built in instead of priming it. Now this particular product can be put over a prime surface also, but particularly it's specially designed for bare metal. The only disadvantage is it takes 15 minutes longer than the previous seam sealers, two-part seam sealers that we just talked about. This is also an epoxy. It provides the latest technology in seaming, seals, fast paint time than traditional sealers. It has excellent tooling characteristics. Everything you can do with the regular non-sag high build seam sealer you can do with this. It is gray in color, so it's a little different in color even though it comes in the same type of tube. It can be dispensed in a manual with a manual gun or with a pneumatic gun. So this is pretty popular. I'd say this particular product is used obviously much more than a self-leveling seam sealer, but it seems to go hand in hand with a regular non-sag, depending on the application, whether we're going over a prime surface or a bare metal surface. Sprayable seam sealers have become very popular in the industry. Matter of fact, this is the instructions that comes in a S4 starter kit that we have available, and I'm going to show you a video of that in a minute. This particular kit provides you with everything you need to take a regular two-part seam sealer in a 200, 220 milliliter tube and have the ability to spray it now. Obviously, Makes life a whole lot easier for the technician and the ability to spray it instead of have to brush it out in a large area, but it all depends on what kind of texture they're trying to match. Our product manager, Joe, does a nice job in the video that I'm going to show you in a minute on how to do that, but I wanted to let you know that there's instructions in the kit that Joe even alludes to in the video, but it gives you the ability to take the non-sag regular black epoxy seam sealer and also the bare metal seam sealer, and now you have the ability to spray them. We recommend that you don't spray the self-leveling seam sealer because it's just going to continue to flow once you spray it. So if you've ever done it, you can probably realize what kind of a mess it'll make, and it's very hard to control. So here's the instructions that are available that Joe was actually going to show you. Videos, pictures worth 1,000 words, so you'll actually get to see it. But the instructions are in the actual kit itself. This next slide actually shows you the components in the kit. It comes with 6 standard tips. You notice these are a little longer than the standard mixing tip because now it gives us the ability to flow. The nozzle on the end is where the air is introduced, so now you have the ability of projecting the seam sealer and able to control the amount of material that you want to come out from the gun and also from the air nozzle. The system comes fully equipped to go right onto a regular pneumatic gun. Joe will actually show you in the video on how to do that. It also comes, as we mentioned, with 6 mixing tips and this particular nozzle, so everything you need other than a pneumatic gun is available in this particular kit. And of course, the mixing tips are sold separately because once you put the sprayable attachment that you see with the hose and everything on there, you don't need anything else other than more mixing tips. So as I mentioned, this particular product fits on the bottom of most pneumatic guns. It can be used to either spray the regular non-sag high build seam sealer or the bare metal seam sealer. The tip actually screws on to any type of seam sealer. The nozzle is pretty universal. And I'm going to show you a video right now of Joe, one of our product managers, actually utilizing the product so you can get a better idea of how we can go about spraying these 2 seam sealers. So, just a second. And this video is also available on our website if you ever wanted to view it at another time. So, here it is.
We're going to show how to assemble the new S4 starter kit and as well as to use the system. You'll need 4 components total. 3 of them are pictured here, the 4th one being the seam sealer. You'll have our pneumatic gun, 41399, as well as the S4 starter kit, which is 06403. The starter kit comes with an atomization unit, as well as a bag of 6 tips. You also have the instruction sheet included to go through the step-by-step instructions that we'll go through here. First thing that we'll do is attach our atomization unit to the pneumatic gun. You want to make sure that there's no fitting on the bottom of the gun, of course. And as you screw it on, make sure this perpendicular unit is pointing in the same direction as the barrel of the gun. You hand tighten it to start. Then you just want to snug it up with a wrench. Once the S4 unit is hooked up to the pneumatic gun, the next step is to load the cartridge. You can use the S4 system with either a full body seam sealer, part number 97120, or the new bare metal seam sealer, part number 06398. The first step will be to attach the airline to the gun. Before we do so, though, we'll want to make sure that the valve is in the off position, which is the vertical position. So hook up the airline to the gun. We'll also want to make sure the button on the pneumatic gun is pointing toward reverse air. So when we pull the trigger, the plungers will go back. With the cartridge, just a simple flathead screwdriver. Pop that right off. And you load the cartridge into the gun. Now that the cartridge is loaded, the first thing we'll want to do is move the button back to forward air. Then we'll want to purge a small amount of material out to make sure that both components are equalized. After purging the tube, the next step will be to put on the S4 mixing tip. Our tip is very unique in that it comes pre-assembled with the wing nut at the bottom as well as the tip attachment. We'll just want to put the tip over top of the cartridge and tighten it on. Once the tip is on the gun, we'll want to take the elbow joint from the hose and attach it to the bottom of the tip. Just press it on and it's locked in. As you're going to spray the material, there's three things that can help adjust the pattern that you get. One is the air pressure at the valve. Two is your distance from the surface. You can also adjust how much material is coming out of the bag. So what we'll do is we'll get this started. There we go. So with a lot of this air pressure and very close to the surface, you can get a well bead. Or turning up the air pressure higher and backing it off a little bit, you can get a more textured look over a larger area. When you're done spraying, you want to move the valve back to the off position, which again is the vertical position. Disconnect the elbow joint. You want to push down on it and push it off of the tip. Then you want to pick up the gun and push it back to reverse air. So that way as you pull the trigger, it'll pull the plungers back as opposed to dumping on more material. We can leave the tip on for storage purposes, and then disconnect the airline from the gun.
So that's the S4 starter kit and the pneumatic gun setup for spraying. As Joe mentioned, it should be used only for the regular non-sag high-bid seam sealer and the bare metal seam sealer. It pretty much comes with everything you need. As he also mentioned, the tip is left on the seam sealer. For storage, you do the same thing with the other two particular products. Also, another thing, if I forgot to mention it earlier, another popularity with two-part seam sealers, or at least these in particular, these have a 2-year shelf life, where most of the one parts have a 1-year shelf life. So the fact that the product can be in a shop for a long period of time gives them the flexibility to do what they need to do. Also, in reusing the tube, all you need to do is take the tip off and put a new tip on, because obviously the material is hardened inside of the tip. So that concludes the presentation portion. I also want to show you, this is our actual application. We are listed in the Industry Alliance under St. Gobain, our parent company. The particular classes that are available, the one that we're doing right now is this one right here, the Best Practices Seam Sealers course, which is number 11 on our list. It's been available since February of this year. So this is the particular course that we're doing right now. Folks that attended the previous Impact 1-hour webinar that we did the Adhesives Refinishing course, which was number 4, which went over more structural repair, other parts of this particular line. Today we're focusing just on seam sealers. These are the 13 classes that we have available. This particular application, if you wanted to get credit for this particular course, is available on ICAR's website, and it's also available on our website, nortonautomotive.com. It's a 2-page application. What happens if you decide to go ahead and get credit for the course, you'll take the tests, which I can show you, and I know Melissa plans on sending it to folks. It's a relatively easy test. It's 5 questions. It's mostly about the dry times that we just discussed. Also, a lot of the information is available on our website. So there's 5 questions that are there. The big thing that I need to strive here is, if you want to get credit for the course, please make sure you provide an ICAR ID or the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. I don't want those. ICAR does. They're to make sure that you are who you are for identification purposes. And, of course, all this information over here, name, address, state, and zip code and phone number, that is so you can receive credit from ICAR. What happens is, once I get the test, I submit the score electronically to ICAR, so then that you are in their system. And then, of course, to be able, for identification purposes, is why they ask you for your ICAR ID or the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. So there's the test if anybody wants to receive credit for it. Here's the application. One thing that I will point out on the top of the application is ICAR ask folks to wait till 45 days from today in submitting their particular request for points, or credits, I should say. The reason for that is we're not the only ones that submit test scores to ICAR. So I will have you in the system within a week or so once I receive the test, which you can send to me electronically via my email, or can mail it to me, or give me a call and I can tell you where to send it to. I'll go back to that original slide listing my email address and all that fun stuff. But as you can probably see from the very first page, this is why ICAR wants that information, and you can see right here underneath the date, they're looking for your ICAR ID or the last 4 digits of your Social Security for identification purposes. I don't provide them any of that information. That's so you can get credit down the road, and as you can see, you need it here for the application. So I will put up the very first slide here with my contact information. As I mentioned, you can call the 866 number on the product and get me directly. It goes directly to that cell phone number that's on the sheet, and you might have heard it vibrating. Somebody probably called me on the tech line while we were doing this webinar. There's my email address, and of course you can get a hold of Melissa. She has the presentation, she has the test, she has the application too. And as I mentioned, the application is available on ICAR's website and our website. So I'm going to send it back to Melissa and see if there's any questions. There's the application once again, and I will leave up the first slide for you folks that might need my contact information.
Okay,
that
Craig,
concludes
thanks.
the presentation. Unless anybody has any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you.
I don't see any questions. If anybody has any, you can raise your hand. I'll unmute you, or you can type them in. Just to, I guess, repeat, I'm going to send you the 5-question test with the application and Craig's information. Then you'll in turn send the test to Craig. He'll, see that you passed. He'll put in the scores to ICAR, and then you have to follow up with ICAR to actually get the credit applied to your account. Correct?
That's correct, Melissa. Thank you. Our training is free, but where the rubber meets the road, ICAR is basically hitting you up with a processing fee so you can get your credits, kind of like if anybody went to college and you wanted your transcripts after the fact, they hit you with a processing fee. So. Okay.
And again, I'll have Craig's information, so if you guys have any questions, you can either call or email him, and he'll get right back to you. He's really good about that. And okay, there's no questions. So, all right, I appreciate everybody attending today, and we'll let you know about upcoming webinars, and we'll be in touch. Thanks for being with us today. Bye.